On today's Rice Report, I am joined by multi-award winning investigative journalist Ben Swann. And today we're going to discuss everything from freedom of speech to censorship to blockchain technology, current events, and much more. Going to have links down below for everything we talk about. And if this just happens to be your first time ever watching any of my videos, I do encourage you to explore my channel. Make sure you subscribe, smash that like button, hit the notification bell if you want to stay up to date with my videos as they come out. I encourage everyone to check out my Patreon channel where I post up exclusive content, and it's a way to support what I do directly. And be sure to check out my brand new audio podcast. You can find that at anchor.fm/Rice Radio, and you can find it on every major podcasting platform by searching Rice Radio. And we're just going to go ahead and get right into today's report. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, joining me today is multi-award winning investigative journalist Ben Swann. Ben, thanks for taking the time to come on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
No, and I really honestly do appreciate you taking the time, man. As I was saying before we started, I got a lot of respect for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Especially when it comes to journalism and working in the media game. Because, I mean, it's not like you haven't played around in the mainstream. I guess you've kind of gotten in a little bit of trouble with some of the topics you've been covering, which, you know, that's why I respect what you do. You're trying to put the actual truth out there and go against the grain for what the mainstream media is doing. And so for people who are unfamiliar, in your words, who is Ben Swann?
Well, I'm as you said, an investigative journalist. I've been in broadcast for over 20 years. I will say that, you know, starting out my career, I had a very traditional path. I was a news photographer. I became a bureau chief, a morning anchor, a primetime anchor. I worked for CBS and NBC and Fox. And I really had no particular, pursuit of what people today would call conspiracy stories or even truther stories. I had no bend towards that. I was just being a news anchor, broadcaster. And I would say more than a reporter. For most of my career early on, I was just a broadcaster, somebody who gets up in front of a camera and repeats what comes up in the teleprompter in front of them. And when I started covering the drug war in Mexico, and this was back in 2007, 2008, 2009, my whole kind of view of media changed dramatically in terms of recognizing how many lies people were being fed about what they were being told was happening versus what was actually happening. And that began to kind of shift my thinking. And then in 2012, I had a huge awakening when I started covering the presidential campaign, because I was working for the Fox station in Ohio, presidential campaign in 2012. And I started covering Ron Paul at the time. And not to promote him in any way, just covering candidates, just trying to be honest in coverage of candidates, and covered him and got some blowback from my bosses over it, but saw there was a huge audience of people saying, hey, the things this guy talks about are never talked about on TV. And I didn't believe that. I actually thought that was untrue, and started looking at the things that he said. And that kind of started a process for me of recognizing two things were happening. One was that the majority of what we reported on television was untrue. Or was leaving out lots of context and bigger picture issues, which I didn't realize as a reporter for a long time. And then the second thing was that there was an entire other world of understanding and context for everything. The biggest issues of our time in terms of health, in terms of politics, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of terrorism and the war on terror, there was an entirely different way of viewing things. And what's sad to me is that as a journalist for years, I was completely unaware of that world. And when you become aware of it, it really changes everything.
Well, it does. I mean, it does one of two things. You do what you did, and you kind of get away from it and try to do what you were intending to do from the get-go, or you just kind of succumb to it and you just get paid and you just do it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, take that second option, which really sucks. And the thing with Ron Paul in particular is, that guy deserves a lot of respect for what he's done as a congressman. And while he was a congressman, he was a Republican. But because he was running for president as a Libertarian, they didn't want to cover what he was talking about, because he was talking about getting rid of the Federal Reserve, the mainstream news. So I can totally get that. But it's cool that he kind of caught your attention and you kind of grasped a little bit of those ideals. So today, I guess you would consider yourself a libertarian?
Yeah, I would. I would say that I'm a libertarian, but I would say professionally, there's no political slant to what I do. Now, I would say what I look for is authenticity in content. So just as a quick 4 examples, Joe Biden announcing his VP, Kamala Harris, or Kamala Harris, however you want to say her name, as his VP. Look, the thing about Harris is she's a U.S. senator. She's a freshman senator. She is everything wrong with the American political system, and she's everything wrong with the judicial system, the prosecutorial system, and the policing system. And so what infuriates me as a journalist is having covered her and having covered the issue of Black Lives Matter for years, and the issue of police brutality and no-knock warrants, all those issues for many, many years. And I've been a strong advocate in reforming judicial systems and policing systems in America. To see someone like her, who is the center of the rotten apple, all those activists who are in the streets and they're screaming and they're yelling about change, 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 for any of them to either endorse her or to look at her as some kind of beacon of hope is disgusting to me. And I think a lot of them will, without knowing anything about her, because the media is not going to tell the truth about who she actually is. As I said, she is the center of a rotten piece of fruit. She is the core.
Well, I mean, we got people like you. We've got World Alternative Media. We got Press for Truth. We got We Are Change. We got a lot of different people out there that are trying to push out like a non-biased, truthful message to get that other side out there so that people can be, informed. And I think that people are starting to get it a little bit more, especially with everything that's happened this year. People sitting at home, social distancing, and things like that. They've had a lot of time to think. Seeing what the news is reporting and seeing how there's conflicts and seeing how stuff just doesn't add up. And then you hear about the reporting, and we'll talk about the financial system later, but you're hearing about high numbers of unemployment. At the same time, you have all-time highs going on in the stock market, which shouldn't even be said in the same sentence. So people are starting to wake up to the truth. And Kamala Harris, I say Kamala because I remember it from the wrestling. There was a wrestler named Kamala.
That's why I say it too.
So I had to say it like that just for the wrestler. And I think he recently passed away, unfortunately.
He did.
But so yeah, shout out to Kamala, the wrestler. But I think that was an interesting choice. I don't know how that's going to go. I'm really thinking the election terms are going to be a really interesting time period, because we're going to see, I believe, that second wave of COVID coming on and extreme lockdowns. Who knows if we'll even see an election. But, to get back to that, and I know you do political commentary, and I do want to talk about that, but I want to talk about what you're currently doing. You have right behind you, Reality Check was one of your shows. And then, then there's Truth in Media. Is that a show or is that a brand?
So it's both. It's the website is Truth in Media, and now it's a podcast as well. So we do a Truth in Media podcast twice a week, and they're short 13 to 15-minute segments where we take something and we really try to break down the numbers behind it. When you look at what social media is doing right now, anything that they find that they disagree with, and basically anything that's truthful that goes against the narrative, they're calling fake news, or they're saying that it's partly false, and everyone's seeing this. And actually, I think, despite their best efforts, Facebook and Google and Twitter are actually contributing to the awakening of millions of people by doing that. People
with their
who say
fact checkers and stuff.
Yes, because all of a sudden somebody says, well, wait a minute. You're telling me I can't share this thing? People are being threatened that you're going to be removed if you share this content. You're sharing harmful information. My daughter just sent me something the other day. She was shocked. It was a picture of Bill and Hillary Clinton, right? And it went down the list of all these different people associated with accused, I should say, of being connected to child trafficking. And it had this long list of people. I mean, it was talking about Chrissy Teigen and deleting 60,000 tweets. And it just had probably 24 different accusations. And among them was Tom Hanks becoming a citizen of Greece, dual citizenship in Greece, so that he could escape prosecution or something like that. And so this, I'm not kidding you, long list of like 24 accusations on this little social media post. And now there's a flag on it that says partly false. And you click why, and it says, yes, Tom Hanks has dual citizenship, but Greece does have extradition. That was the thing that they fact checked. And she sends this to me, and she sends it in all caps, and it says dad. And underneath it, she says, this is the only thing they're saying is untrue. And I think what starts to happen is that this goal of saying, well, we're going to label everything as being false, 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 and drive people away from it is actually having the opposite effect. It's making people more curious. It's making people say, well, wait a minute. I didn't think this was true until you told me that I can't look at it, right? And then there's a natural curiosity to want to go look at it.
Yeah, just by doing that. It's like when your parents tell you not to do something, you almost want to do it because they say not to do it. So like the reverse psychology, I don't understand it. It's like as if they are trying to wake people up. So I don't know if it's that good guy, bad guy duality within the system, because it seems like there is that within everything. With everything that's going on, I mean, politicians, there's good and bad politicians,
sure,
with the rioters and all that. But so now you mentioned Truth in Media. Reality Check is still a show that you do?
No, we do not do it right now. We want to bring it back. Reality Check was a segment that I did for years on those mainstream channels that I worked for.
Right.
And it really, I mean, it was a huge success, probably the most successful local news franchise, if you want to call it that, in history. I mean, we did 110 million video views in just 1 year in 2016 of those Reality Check segments. So unbelievably successful in terms of waking people up, but that's why I don't do it anymore. But I keep the sign because to me, the sign, it speaks to this thing that was so volatile for mainstream news that it created kind of this massive paradigm shift within even local news of what you can be doing. And you talked about duality. Here's a dual concept for you. Ratings like you've never had before versus a message that you don't like. And how do you deal with that as a news editor or a news manager? And I've seen that conflict multiple times where we get huge ratings because people say, I want to know more. Someone's actually talking about something real, but then the conflict of bosses calling down from corporate and saying, get that off the air, don't put that on the air.
Yeah, no, I mean, what is it now? The majority of all the mainstream media all over the world is controlled by 6 companies, like over 90%. Is that the correct number?
Right. About 90% of all media is controlled by 6 companies. That's right.
And that is insane when you think about that. And if people want to do their own research as to what those companies are and who's involved with it, stuff like that will start to wake you up a lot more, especially when you start looking at history of the United States over the past 107 years, roughly. Yeah, I would say since 1913, just focus after that point. And then it gets pretty interesting. But something that I think that you're doing that I really love, and I've heard about this when you were kind of in the beginning stages before it even like came out, was Isogoria. Mm-hmm. Am I saying that right too?
You are saying that right.
Okay.
We've shortened it as the way that we're launching it as ISE.media, but the actual name, full name is Isogoria. It's a Greek word that means equality in the freedom to speak.
Now, I really like what you're doing with this. On your, the mission statement is to create an uncensored, blockchain-based, decentralized news and entertainment platform. And it will also have a funding mechanism for independent media, which I think is great. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with that? Because I mean, I don't think, is it launched completely yet, or is it still at the beginning stages?
We're in the beginning stages of it right now. We're actually running equity crowdfunding campaign to raise the money to actually build out the structure of it. But the goal is to build, as you just read, a blockchain-based system that is decentralized. It's decentralized, essentially news network that's 24/7, and then also has channel systems like YouTube built into it for content creators. And the goal is to give content creators a place where they can go and they can speak, and they can speak truth. And you know what? They can be wrong too. They can go there and they can post things that are untrue. That's one of the things about having freedom of speech, is you have the freedom to say things that are true and not true. We have this crazy idea that's being kind of pounded into us in society right now, where we're being told that the greatest threat to humanity is someone who's not telling the truth. That's a crazy thought, right? Yeah. Because at the same time, Facebook is telling us, and Mark Zuckerberg is telling us, he will not fact check political ads because politicians have the right to lie. Now think about that contrast. You're telling us that people don't have the right to lie on your platform unless you're the most powerful people, in which case you have the right to lie. So it's a crazy idea. But what we're doing with ISE.media is really trying to build out a place that encourages content creators to come from all different points of view, different walks of life. We're not trying to create an echo chamber. We're actually trying to create a place where there's debate, where there's free speech, where there are competing ideas. You know, the thing about bad ideas, the thing about wrong ideas is that I'm a strong believer that those ideas get flushed out within community and within discussion, within people communicating with each other. You don't get rid of bad ideas by suppressing them. You get rid of bad ideas by shining light on them. And I think that's where they go away. I think history shows us that over and over again. That's how you do it. So what we're doing is we're building out a system that really is for content creators. And then on top of all of that, I have worked with a couple of different cryptocurrencies in the past, including Dash and Smart Cash, and both of them have treasury systems built into their ecosystems in order to fund projects that would promote their crypto. And what we want to do is build a similar type of system within our ecosystem so that content creators, because as you know, if you're a content creator, you can have great ideas. You may not have the money or the funding to go out and create something. And it's very tough if you don't have an audience and you don't have advertising. How do you get the money to do that?
Right.
So what we want to do is we want to build a treasury where the community is able to go and be pitched ideas for content by content creators who they have passion, they have maybe talent, they just don't have the funding to do it, and to get content created that way as well, which creates, I think, again, it creates kind of a hive system where people are able to really be invested in content being created, not just as a viewer and a consumer, but being actively engaged.
That's a very cool idea. And what I'm curious about, since you mentioned Smart Cash and Dash and the fact of a fund that goes to a foundation that the community can vote on how it's being utilized. Have you thought about how you're going to be building this? Is it going to be a code fork of something like Dash? Or are you going to create a new blockchain, or do you know what you're doing yet?
So we do not have that ironed out yet. So the structure will be based upon those treasury systems. And I say that again, because that's the system that I'm most familiar with. Our team is actually working on that right now. So that's what they're trying to develop. I don't have details, unfortunately, of exactly how it will work. Yeah. And actually, having said that, because, as we do this equity crowdfund, we have, over 600 people who have already joined up with us. That's part of what we want to do as well, is create a community system where they have a voice in what it looks like to create this.
No, that's a great idea. I mean, when you talk about the whole community-based voting and having a fund that not a single entity or a centralized source gets to choose where those funds go to, it makes people feel like they're a part of the community, and it also shows how much people care about what people are doing as far as content creators, because it works the same way as far as if me as a content creator covering cryptocurrency, I could put in a bid for a community that does the same thing and offer a certain level of marketing and a certain level of videos, and then the community can decide, yes, we'll approve you, or no, we won't approve you. So I think that's a great idea, man. And I would definitely like to stay on top of it. And as ISE.media starts to launch, I'd like to cover it more and possibly even be a part of it, because it sounds like something I would love to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really is the goal. It's funny, when we came on here together, you were saying we look kind of like polar ends of the spectrum, right? The great thing about that is, and that's what we want to develop, is an ecosystem that isn't some carbon copy of itself over and over. And I think, unfortunately, we have such a polarized media, but what happens when you have a polarized media is that people get into their tribes and they go into this one area, right? And they're very focused on just being kind of focused on this one thing, and they don't want to hear anything else or see anything else. And I think it's making us dumber as a country. I think it makes us more splintered. I think it makes us more susceptible to propaganda, because you don't know how to listen anymore or consider other ideas. And I think media is at the center of all of that. It is at the center of division. It's at the center of confusion. It's at the center of really all of the negative aspects of what we're seeing right now. And I think media can be an answer to it as well.
No, you're definitely correct in everything that you just said. But to think that what needs to happen is more people need to wake up and realize this, because this is what it took me a long time to grasp this. And when I did, it made a lot of sense. But everything that's occurring today is because we let it occur. The consent of the governed, we just gave it away. We didn't really fight. And I've been reading about some things about old American history, and during the Revolutionary War time period, the people of the United States or the colonies would literally just strike back for the most minimal things, like raising a tax on tea by the pound by 2 pence. And they would just, attack the British. but we've become so docile and don't really care about that. And I think that with everything that's happening, with all the censorship, all the shadow banning, the way that the media is being utilized, the way that things are being portrayed, the way that people are being divided, if people don't wake up and start doing something about it now, not tomorrow, like I really feel like this is like the time that this is it. Like, we're going to start going into this 1984 world that we're not going to be able to get away from. And this monster, this, whether you want to look at it from the Federal Reserve or the central banks, IMF, it's just, if we keep allowing it to get so big and the creature to become bigger, it's going to become unstoppable to a point that we're not going to be able to do anything. And I really feel like we're at that cusp right now in history that we need to stand up, and there needs to be like a real true revolution of sorts, whether it's a bloodless revolution or whether it's all out war. People need to start standing up for their rights, and people need to start realizing what's going on and realize that we've been dumbed down, uneducated, conditioned to be what we are. And we're going into this world of idiocracy, like the movie. Have you seen that movie?
I have not, but I think you're absolutely right when you say, you know, it either is a bloodless war or it becomes a violent revolution. But we have the opportunity to prevent it from becoming a violent revolution if we act now. The problem is you reach the point of desperation and it becomes violent when that becomes the only means that are left. Right now, what we're seeing is a process of removing every other method by which we can create balance again and restore balance. That's being taken away. So I think we still have time, but it's got to be now. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I'm not saying like we don't have tomorrow, but we're down to the finish line. Like it's really, we've got a couple years. I really feel like maybe a little less for everybody to start coming together and for people to be woken up to what's actually happening as part of the Great Awakening process, if you want to call it that. And that kind of goes into politics, because a lot of this, you know, the media and things like that would also go into the same conjunction with how the politicians act and what's going on now. With we got Democrats and Republicans fighting and can't come to any sort of agreement on how to help Americans who are struggling right now.
Right.
And it's all because people can't come to agreements and people need help right now.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on like where we're headed as far as a two-party political system and how people are viewing that and such? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think the two-party system is clearly broken. I think it's been broken for many, many years. We were never designed to be a two-party system. You know, George Washington warned about parties in general, saying that eventually we would have this. We would have two parties that dominated everything, right? But I think what we're seeing now is a kind of an interesting moment. So over the weekend, the Trump administration and President Trump himself issued a whole bunch of executive orders to try to fill in the gaps for what Congress can't seem to find the will to do right now. And the problem is that Congress is not acting as representatives of the people. They're acting as precursors to an election. And so when Republicans are trying to do anything they can to hold on to power, Democrats are doing anything they can to try to take power. And then the problem is that at the center of everything that's happening politically is the fact that the struggles that we're having with the economy are completely manufactured. They're not real reactions to market forces. They're the reaction to to orders based upon the coronavirus, right? And so because of the orders that have been issued, so you'd have to say it this way: what we're not seeing are problems from the economy. We're seeing problems from the reaction to the coronavirus. And the reaction has been shut down businesses, close down schools, don't allow people to work. Nobody can go shopping. Nobody can go to restaurants. So if you work in the service industry, you're out of a job. And then they're telling everyone, sit down and don't worry because we'll send you a check. And then they send you a check for a while. And then all of a sudden they get to the point and say, can't send you a check anymore because we can't agree on how much that check is supposed to be. Well, that's entirely the problem, is that you're trying to fix the economy that wasn't broken until you broke it by responding to a virus. Now you look at what's happening in Sweden. I have a piece that's actually coming out tomorrow about this. If you look at the numbers in Sweden right now, it's pretty incredible. They did not impose a lockdown on their country. They did not force businesses to close. They have not even forced people to wear face masks. And if you look at what's happened, the numbers, they had high numbers in the beginning in terms of deaths related to the coronavirus. It has significantly dropped every single month until here we are in August. And they've had in the month of August, one death from coronavirus. Right. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is now going through what we're calling the second wave. And as a result of that, are imposing much stricter lockdowns, close down even more businesses, keep people out of work even longer. And as we said, the US government cannot reach decisions on how to help those people. But go back to the first wave, they didn't help people the first time either. There are many people, yes, who got unemployment checks originally, but at the same time, most small businesses got nothing. You know, small businesses were told this. They were told you can have $10,000 to cover 2.5 months worth, right, as an emergency loan. And then you had millions of small businesses sign up, and then we're told, oh, well, when we said 10,000, what we meant was up to 10,000. And most small businesses actually only got $1,000, which is nothing. Right. And yet you're being forced to have your doors closed. So what's really happening is we're watching politicians literally destroy America's middle class in a matter of just a few months. And what they're hoping, I think, is to have the population utterly desperate by the time that November comes around. And so far, it seems to be working.
Yeah, and I mean, you said a lot there. What I will say is, in regards to coronavirus and the economy, that definitely was a scapegoat for everything that's going on as far as financial collapse. I mean, you and I know that 2008, when we had what happened, our crash, our recession, the only reason we came out of it was because the Federal Reserve and the central banking system stepped in and they printed quantitative easing 1 through 3 and they propped the system up. And that's what's happening now. But last year, we started seeing the inverted yield curve take place. And then that was about the middle of last year, maybe about this time last year. And then in fall, we've seen the Federal Reserve step in with the repo markets. So we already knew everything was going downhill. It was just the timing of this virus is obviously beneficial on a lot of different fronts, but especially when it came to the economy. And now we're printing up more money than we've printed up in 2008 until now. That's right. We're bailing out the same people that we bailed out in 2008, in addition to other industries that have done well in the stock market over the past couple of years, especially since they're buying back their own stock. And, you know, we're still bailing these people out. There's a lot of that information has been undisclosed where they're not even saying what companies they're bailing out. But then, like you said, the average person, especially the middle class, are being just decimated. And people some people aren't getting it quite yet. Now, I think that when we have this next wave, and I'm thinking, and this is kind of where I wanted to go with current events, not to kind of rehash on a lot of stuff that's already happened, because I mean, you cover a lot of that on your channels and on your different websites. And I'm definitely gonna have links down below for everything that we talk about. But as far as the current events and going into the election season and thinking about the second wave, I'm thinking at the end of this month, the beginning of next month is when things are going to start getting weird. And I don't know what direction that's going to head, but I think that it's going to be between September and October. It's going to be very interesting. I'd like to get your thoughts on, like, not only just the political climate, but in the addition of a second lockdown, but just how you think the social unrest will be at that point.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, if there is really a heavily imposed social lockdown and an economic lockdown like what we saw earlier this year. What I mean by that is some states have kind of loosened things, but now all of a sudden we're surging in the other direction. So for instance, right now, masks are being required and people are getting fined. In Hoboken, New Jersey, you get fined $200 if you go outside without a mask on. And so we're seeing like this big push towards, we're going to close things down, lock things down, businesses will have to close again. And as that happens, I don't think that in a lot of states, especially in red states, I think you're going to get zero compliance. I think you're going to find pockets of people who are going to say, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. So if you want to throw me in jail, you can. And I think that's where you're going to see things get really crazy, is because people can't do it anymore. It's not a question of these people are not good citizens. They're not patriots. They don't care about the rest of us. No, They're saying, I can't survive. So is the cure actually worse than the actual disease, than the virus itself? Your cure is to shut everything down and to cost me my entire life savings, or cost me my business, or cost me my future. And so at some point, people are going to begin to, I think, lose it in that respect. And again, the question will be whether or not we have leadership that backs the people. Right now, no one's backing the people. And I think for a while, it felt like President Trump was moving in that direction because he was dismissing a lot of this and saying, we got to get businesses back open again. We got to get kids back to school. But he, I think because of his political handlers in this election, has moved in the other direction now. And he seems to be moving back towards the, well, you know, we've got to do what we've got to do, because he sees that polls well. What he doesn't recognize, I think, and if he's watching your show, and I'm sure he does, I would say to the president, listen, Mr. President, you need to listen to that silent majority that's not saying anything, because they get shouted down and they get attacked if they say anything, but they are not in agreement with this. And so by selling those people out, he's going to leave them with no option, because it's going to look like either Biden or Trump is essentially the same person by the time we get to November.
Yeah, I mean, well, a douche and a turd sandwich, but basically the same person. And what's crazy about that, and I'd like to kind of get your, since you mentioned Donald Trump and the light that you did, there was a lot of talk of people saying that he wants to get rid of the Federal Reserve, get rid of the IRS. I mean, he even mentioned getting rid of taxation of labor, capital gains taxes, which essentially would like just obsolete the job of the IRS. Right. And even the idea of going back to sound money and having money that's backed by gold or silver or a basket of precious metals. Do you think that any of the executive orders are going in that direction? Because I'm kind of hearing from a lot of people, and I can't see it specifically in the executive orders, but that the Treasury is now, that the Federal Reserve has been enveloped by the Treasury. And they're basically directly answering to the Treasury, which answers to Donald Trump.
It seems like to some extent that is happening. I think that is true. I think the problem with Trump is when we talk about fiscal policy or monetary policy, Trump will just print into an oblivion. I mean, he doesn't have any problem with that. He has. So for those who are watching, right, who say, hey, the Federal Reserve is a huge problem, well, then this president's not your answer, because he has no problem with that issue. He has no problem with printing money indefinitely. He has no problem with any of it. But I think what makes him unique to other presidents is that while he doesn't have a problem with that, he also is open to ideas that are attractive to people who dislike the Federal Reserve, things like shutting down the IRS or not collecting, massive amounts of taxation on people. I think that he is more open to those ideas. And I think he's more fluid because he's not controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations, right? He's not controlled by the Atlantic Council and many of these entities that have controlled presidents in the past. That doesn't mean everything that he does is right or that I would agree with. I would disagree with many things this president does. But if you just look at what he's done in terms of trying to end wars overseas, right, and going against that grain, and he's really struggled with it. I don't think because he has an unwillingness to do it. I think because the forces pushing back against him are much stronger than most people anticipate. The fact that he's willing to do that gives me some hope that he would, especially in a second term, now that he has nothing to lose, really try to make some significant changes.
Okay, well, what about the idea that possibly what Donald Trump is doing, especially like with the special purpose vehicles and allowing the Fed to invest in bonds with companies, is stacking up all this debt on the Federal Reserve? Right. And then you can combine the ideas of what NESARA, GESARA, and even the movement of QAnon. Is it possible that this is all being done as a setup to end that system so that we can reset and go into a global economic reset with sound money that's backed by gold or precious metals? I mean, do you think that is a potential idea? Like, is that hope there, or do you think that people are just kind of blind and are just kind of
I think people are hopeful. I think they're hopeful. I wouldn't call them blind. I would say that they are hopeful because they're looking for someone who's willing to do it. And I personally, I don't believe this is the guy to do it. Okay. But I also believe that he is more open than any president in the last 100 years has been to doing that. So I'm not saying that President Trump wouldn't do it. I don't know that he wouldn't do it. What I would say is that he is an unpredictable character, certainly. I don't know that he shares all of those beliefs, but I don't know him. What I would say is that the fact that he's willing to take the steps that he's taken on certain issues, including, by the way, the way he's fighting with China over issues that no one would have anticipated.
Right.
If you had told anyone a year ago, President Trump's going to ban TikTok in the United States, they would have said you were crazy just a year ago. There's no way that's going to happen. And yet here we are, probably less than 45 days away from him saying he's going to do that. So the one thing that those who, especially the QAnon people who are hopeful, and I think they're hopeful more than anything else, that he will be that guy, I would say that if anyone's going to be that guy, it certainly could be President Trump, because he's so unpredictable.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And something that you said that really struck me is that people are looking to someone, looking for someone that can help save them out of their situation or help change the world. And that's kind of where I've been at lately, is we have to take this into our own hands. Like, what is it that you think, Ben? I know it's kind of getting out of like our normal, like what you would normally cover, but what is it that you think that we as individuals here in the United States and around the world that we can do to be a part of this change, to step up and force our politicians to do what is right and what should be done?
Well, I would say the first thing that you can do if you want to force a politician to do something is stop looking at the president and stop looking at Congress. And you need to look at your city council and your local mayor. I think if you want to have a massive impact on your own personal life, and I think if anything, coronavirus has proven one thing, that local municipalities are much more important than what they're doing on the federal level. Get control of who is running your cities, who is running your police departments. All this discussion about police brutality in America, well, that starts at the local level, right? And no mayors are being held responsible for the fact that they use police officers for taxation without representation. They use police forces as a way of deriving revenue from their citizens. And then they turn around, well, we'll paint the streets, and they'll say Black Lives Matter, but then they send those same officers out to write tickets all day long the next day.
Yeah.
So if you want to change something, it's got to change on that local level. It's not as exciting, it's not as sexy as presidential politics, but it's where there is so much power. And what we're seeing for small businesses, if you had strong, principled mayors and city councils across the country, what you would find is people saying, we're not going to shut down your business. We're not going to lock it down. And we're not going to force you into these positions where you're choosing between feeding your family and essentially having to hold up and beg for a handout from the government. You would have politicians and leaders, actual leaders, who see things differently. So that's where I think real change can happen and should be happening.
Well said, man. And I think that people should definitely consider that. I think that, that is what our founding fathers wanted for our country to be, is everything being state and localized. And it starts with your local area, then it goes to your state, and then it goes out. So, I think it's good for us to get back to that point, especially when you consider everything that's been happening. Community pulling together is the best way that we're going to be able to survive and thrive through anything that's coming, because
that's right.
That's how we used to do it back in the days. In these tribal days, people banded together and they used their resources and they pulled their strength in numbers. So I think that it'd be really kind of cool to get back to that kind of aspect of humanity while still incorporating the technology and the modern day things that we have, which I think are, be an excellent way of living. But that goes into us evolving, and hopefully, we're on that point. We're on that road now. Hopefully people are going to start waking up and evolving to what we are, and the potential that we can be sovereign individuals, and we can live in a world of natural law where we treat people how we want to be treated. And we don't need for someone to look after us and tell us what we should and shouldn't do, because if everybody really truly treated everyone how they wanted to be treated, none of that would even be an issue.
That's right.
So, dude, I really honestly enjoy you coming on the show, and I'd like to do more conversations. And I want to definitely encourage people, if they're not familiar with who you are, to check out all your different websites and your shows. And I'm going to have links down below. Now, before we do wrap up, was there anything that you wanted to mention or any final thoughts you wanted to leave us with?
Just, I want to encourage people that, as you said, to check out the new platform, ISE.media. What's really interesting is in the next couple of weeks, we have some projects that are not our own. They were very important projects that have been banned from other sites that we're attempting to bring over to our platform. And so I think it'll help people to begin to see the value of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to be the end all for media. What we're really trying to do is say, hey, there are people with some important things to say that have no place to say them. And so that's really what we're trying to build. So in the next couple of weeks, I would encourage people to stay tuned. I can't say what they are yet because I don't want to get ahead of them. But as soon as they come out, people will understand, hey, this is why this project is needed.
Well, if people are paying any attention to what's going on, especially on YouTube, as far as like the censorship, there's a lot of channels that have been removed, videos that have been removed, and it's all regarding a specific area of topics. So, I mean, I definitely look forward to it, and I'll probably put something out once you guys launch something, especially if it's information that needs to get out there. And any videos that are getting deleted seems like it's information that needs to get out there. So we'll definitely do that. And if you could just bear with me 1 second, I want to wrap things up. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I'm going to have links down below for everything we talked about in today's show. If this happens to be your first time ever checking me out, I do encourage you to explore my channel. If you like what I'm doing, you can support me by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I encourage you to check out my Patreon channel where I post up exclusive content, and it's a way to support what I do directly. I've also recently launched my audio podcast. You can find me at anchor.fm, Rice Radio, and on every major podcasting platform at Rice Radio. And again, links will be down below. And as always, I encourage you to be the change by practicing change.